What is the difference between a fluid inclusion and an enhydro? Now, this is one of these semantic technicalities that nobody should really give you a hard time about. The English language is malleable enough for you to get away with referring to an enhydro as a fluid inclusion or a fluid inclusion as an enhydro. However, it's important to understand that there is a semantic distinction between these two terms. They mean similar things, but they by no means mean the same thing. Enhydro is much more specific than fluid inclusion, so where possible, use the terms correctly. So a fluid inclusion is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It is a pocket of fluid which might be water, but is by no means limited to water, that you can see sort of moving dynamically around inside a pocket, inside a crystal. You might see this in aquamarine, quartz, you might see this in various varieties of spodumene. It is essentially a pocket with some liquid or fluid inside that you can very often see as you gyrate or move around the mineral or crystal. Now, an enhydro, on the other hand, is actually much more specific. Now, the term enhydro is used very specifically to refer to fluid inside a variety of chalcedony geode. Now, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, about broadening that out to sort of geodes in general. So a geode is something that's formed as a result of cavitation. It's something very similar to this. This is a Moroccan quartz geode, for example, and these basically form as a result of a process called cavitation. So they end up with this sort of cavity inside, characterized by various different kinds of crystals, often quartz crystals. Now, understand that water at some point will have been in every single kind of geode like this if they've got crystals inside, largely because that's the exchange mechanism that allows for the crystals to actually form in the first place. So water will get inside the geode because the surface material is quite porous. Water gets inside, and the natural heat heats up that water to the point that it turns it into a gas. So it separates the hydrogen from the oxygen. Then the oxygen binds to the silicon that's usually fairly ubiquitous and exists in the rock already. This creates silicon dioxide, which then, as a result of heating and cooling, ends up manifesting as quartz crystals. Now, sometimes the water will linger around, and before you break that geode open, the water will still be there. Sometimes what people do when you see these videos of people cracking open quartz geodes and then opening it and there's water in there, because please understand that finding a quartz geode with an enhydro is actually quite rare. It's rarer than you might imagine. And this is something that you can try at home. And I have a suspicion that a lot of people who are opening these online for views are actually doing this, because this is quite easy. If you just get a normal uncracked quartz geode, because the surface material is quite porous, you can just leave it in a bucket of water, and over a protracted period of time, the water will seep into the geode, and then bang, you've got an enhydro, because the water is seeped inside it, and you crack it open. And if you're going to do this for views on the internet, then you can act as if the water was already there, when in actual fact they've just submerged it in a bucket full of water. So there is a semantic distinction between enhydro and fluid inclusion. Fluid inclusion is specific to a mineral or crystal that has a pocket filled with fluid or liquid or water, etc., whereas an enhydro specifically refers to a variety of chalcedony geode, but there's nothing terribly wrong or controversial about referring to just geodes more broadly as being characterized or included with water, that you can see as soon as you break that geode open, or you can hear when you shake it about, or sometimes if you pass a light into it, you can see that water moving around dynamically inside. So yes, there is a distinction between the two. Now, if you want an idea about how those things form, there's not really much point in me going through this for two reasons. One, I've already made videos on it, so by all means go and seek those out. But if you want to punch us into a search engine, type in fluid inclusion versus enhydro, our article, which was actually penned by the lovely Charlie Forever Dark, comes up first on Google, at least in the UK it does. It might differ from place to place, but we have an extraordinarily detailed article by Charlie Forever Dark, which unpacks in excruciating detail how both fluid inclusions and enhydros form.